Welcome to Freethought Matters. I'm Laurie Gaylor.
And I'm Dan Barker. Laurie and I are executive directors of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which produces Freethought Matters. Today, we're going to talk with an expert in secularism and the rise of the non-religious.
The Freedom from Religion Foundation, which produces Freethought Matters, is the nation's largest association of free thinkers. That's atheists, agnostics, and other non-believers. We invite you to join us in our vital work to keep our secular government free from religious influence. Become a member at FFRF.org or ask for a complimentary copy of our newspaper, Freethought Today. Freedom depends on freethinkers. Watch prior episodes of Freethought Matters on FFRF's YouTube channel.
Who are the nones? And that's spelled N-O-N-E-S, meaning the religiously unaffiliated, and what do they believe? Our guest today, Ryan T. Cragun, a professor of sociology at the University of Tampa, focuses on both Mormonism and non-religion. Professor Cragun was born and raised in Utah as a Mormon and served as a Mormon missionary. He's the author or co-author of many books, including Beyond Doubt, The Secularization of Society, What You Don't Know About Religion, but Should, Christianity and the Limits of Minority Acceptance, which is subtitled God Loves Almost Everyone, and the intriguingly titled book, How to Defeat Religion in 10 Easy Steps. He also wrote From One Missionary to Another.
Welcome to Freethought Matters, Professor Cragun. And may I call you Ryan?
Yes, absolutely.
First, why did you leave the Mormon Church?
That's a great question. A little complicated. I discussed this in a couple of my publications, but I think it's a combination of a variety of factors. One is a lot of cognitive stuff. Obviously, I was thinking very carefully about my religion, but I think there's a social network component that I think often gets underserved in terms of the process of people leaving. I had moved out of Utah. I was in graduate school. I was learning about empiricism and how to kind of use these tools to kind of apply them to lots of different things. And I was surrounded by people who are not members of the LDS Church. So all of those things kind of combined into that very specific scenario that I was in. And collectively, all of that kind of just led me to leave. I was done. It wasn't for me.
So how do you describe your views today?
Well, I can be really pedantic about this, so I'm going to keep it very simple. I would say I'm religiously, I'm a nun, right? So I don't have a religious affiliation. And then if you ask what I don't believe, right? So I'm not a believer in any deity. So I would say I'm an atheist, but I'm also an agnostic because they're not mutually exclusive. And I would also identify as kind of a humanist, depending on how we think about it. And then sometimes I say I'm a Satanist, right? It just kind of depends on the context, who I'm talking to, what message I'm trying to get across.
Who you want to piss off, what you want to say. So are you telling me you no longer believe that Joseph Smith dug up those golden tablets?
Really hard to continue to believe those.
Congratulations on seeing the light. So since then, you've been studying the non-religious community, whatever that means. You've written a lot of books on secularism, and maybe you can define that word. And since you've started studying the non-religious, this sector has really grown, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's grown pretty dramatically. The numbers I like to give that just kind of put this into context for people is if you look at the U.S. in particular, so we just focus on the U.S., in 1990, about 7% of adults identified as having no religious affiliation. As of today, it's close to 30%. So it's more than quadrupled during that time period. It's hands down the fastest growing quote unquote religious group that we have in the US. It's not a religious group. It's kind of weird to say it that way, but it's grown dramatically, and it's not just in the US. So that recent book with Phil Zuckerman and Isabella Casselstrand called Beyond Doubt looks at this around the world, and we show that this trend is playing out in most developed countries around the world.
And how would you define secularism?
So secularism is a little bit tricky. We tend to use a slightly different term. We would call it secularization. Secularism is usually, I'm trying on Jacques Berliner-Blau here, kind of a desire to see a separation between church and state. Secularization, we would say, is the declining authority of religion in society, and that usually means declining beliefs, behavior, and belonging, which we talk about extensively in that book, and we have kind of big theoretical arguments. So we tend to use very specific, this is why I said I can be really pedantic when it comes to terminology, but this is what we do as academics. So we tend to use the term secularization instead of secularism.
I get it. We asked you on the show in part to talk about a new Pew Research Center study that came out earlier this year that took a closer look at atheists, agnostics, and nothing in particulars, as they're called. Were you surprised by anything in this study?
Not really. So a lot of the stuff that we've seen, I mean, we've been looking at this pretty closely for quite a long period of time. They made a little bit of a deal out of a slight downtick, right? So they were up at 30% of the population was non-affiliated or non-religious, the nuns. And then they said, oh, maybe it's kind of reached its peak. It's down to 28%. To me, that's basically a rounding error, right? So you're unlikely to find, like that's actually going to show a decline. I don't think there's anybody who really thinks that the percentage non-religious is actually going down. So they kind of made a big deal out of that, but I didn't think there was much there.
I thought that was kind of a spin, like maybe some of the researchers are disapproving of these statistics because they were saying, is the growth over? And yet the nuns are the biggest percentage by identification of religion than any other single sect.
Yep.
So more
Absolutely.
than Catholics, more than Southern Baptists, et cetera, et cetera.
There have been attempts to say like, oh, but evangelicals collectively are bigger than the nuns. And I'm like, you're reaching at straws at this point. You're just trying to say like, they're not as big as people think they are. Actually, no, they are. The nuns are actually a very large segment of the population. They're basically 1 in 3 Americans. And we can get into kind of some of the other implications of that report, but I think that the fact that they're that big is actually part of the reason why they're finding what they're finding.
Okay, but whatever they are, or whatever the reason, the real story here is the growth. As you mentioned in 1992, whatever that number mentions, do you think the growth is due to just more reporting, people are more saying, or is there actually something fueling that growth of non-religious?
The argument that we make both in Beyond Doubt, and I have another book coming out with Jesse Smith in October that looks at people leaving religion specifically in the US. So we talk very much about this very issue. The argument we make is that it's, broadly speaking, modernization. So modern ways of thinking that actually lead people out of religion. But that can mean lots of different things. So there's partially kind of differentiation, rationalization, but I can give, those are all really abstract concepts, but I can give some really concrete examples. The one that I usually give with my students that I think works fairly well is I ask my students, okay, how many of you know how an internal combustion engine works? And I might get one student out of a class of 30 who's like, oh, I worked on a car with my dad. I have a sense of what's going on here. But the vast majority are like, I have no idea how an internal combustion engine works. And I said, okay, but if it breaks down, how many of you are going to call a priest to come fix your car and just like pray over it and anoint it with oil or holy water? And they're like, well, that's ridiculous. And I said, and that is modern ways of thinking. You don't think that cars work on magic. And even if we move away from cars and we use cell phones, right? Very few people fully understand how a cell phone allows you to communicate with somebody on the other side of the planet in real time, but no one thinks that it's pixie dust or fairies or anything like that. We know that somebody knows how it works, and that's all modern ways of thinking, and those modern ways of thinking are really what are challenging religion. There are a bunch of other things that we go into as well, but I think that's like the general argument of secularization.
Of course, the Apostle Paul didn't drive a car or have a cell phone, so maybe those scriptures are kind of outdated. That's a good example. That's a good thing to say. We're thinking about the real world.
So if you're game, we wonder if we could do a kind of lightning round with you about some of the findings of this Pew study, or your own findings. You can take them any direction you want. Would that be okay?
Sure.
Okay, so
Yeah, absolutely.
they found that 29% of nuns believe in neither a God nor a higher power. but only 17% were atheists and 20% were agnostics. So what do you think about that?
This was one part, again, I was a consultant on the study. I didn't write it, but I was a consultant. This is one part of the study that I actually didn't love how they framed it, because they made it out as though the vast majority of nuns believe in a God or higher power. And they put the language in there very specifically that it's like God, capital G God, or higher power. But what you miss in there is that it's actually like 50% of them say they believe in a higher power, and it's only like 13 or so percent who say they believe in the Judeo-Christian God of the Bible. So it's actually a very small percentage of the nuns who believe in a traditional Judeo-Christian God. The vast majority believe in a higher power, and we don't really know what that means, right?
That's what I
It would be
wondered.
nice if we could say they're like deists, right? But we actually don't know. Some of them could say, well, I believe in a higher power and it's nature.
Well, there's another study then. Another study to come out.
Oh yeah, we're headed that way. Trust me, we're interested in that question. But I think how they framed it was a little bit interesting there, because it came across as though nuns were more likely to believers than they really are, and they're definitely not as kind of believing as they suggested in that study.
So the next question, are atheists and agnostics different from the 63% of nuns who are just nothing in particular, or how are they different?
That does come out pretty clearly in the study. They show that individuals who identify their religion, which it's not a religion, but they identify their religion as atheist or agnostic, are more civically engaged. And they've done other studies showing that they're actually kind of happier, they're healthier, there are all sorts of kind of benefits of this. And at some level, like we've known this for quite a while. They're also more likely to be male. So like all of the demographic characteristics that we've associated with the nuns for a long time, atheists and agnostics retain those. They're more likely to be male, they're younger, they're better educated, they've got higher incomes. All of those are actually true of the people who identify as atheist or agnostic, and that does make them somewhat different from the nuns. So we do know they're different. They are actually fundamentally different groups.
So 13% of the nuns, according to this, how Pew put it, believe in the God of the Bible, and that did surprise me. But 56%, as you said, believe in this higher power other than a God. Can you comment on that? And you're saying that they never asked what they meant by that higher power.
Correct. We don't actually know. So I don't think, personally, that they all have like really carefully thought out understandings of, say, like a deistic God of Thomas Jefferson or something like that. I think a lot of them are actually in the camp, and I'm actually doing some research on this right now in a closely related topic. They're in the camp of like, I believe that there's something more, but I don't know what it is. So they're not definitive on what they mean by a higher power, and there's really no follow-up in the survey on what they mean by a higher power. So we don't actually know what they're saying, and I think that really does get underreported in the survey, that a lot of these people could literally just be saying, I think, nature is the higher power. That's not a supernatural belief at all.
But what about the 13% of the nuns who said they believe in the God of the Bible? Did that surprise you?
No, not really. We've known for quite a while that a lot of people who say they have no religious affiliation, a bunch of them still go to church. They actually just have issues with organized religion. And you can see why people would have issues with organized religion. All the sex abuse scandals, the theft, religions are not bastions of morality. I actually love reading your guys' regular newsletter that just kind of shows this.
Oh, black collar crimes?
Yes. I mean, it's kind of shocking how pervasive it is. I try not to make a big deal of it in my own research because, like, obviously it's just a confirmation bias type thing. But you could absolutely see how somebody's like, I actually believe a lot, I'm very devout in my belief, but it's religion that's the problem, not the beliefs. So I'm not surprised at all that a certain subset of the nothings in particular, the nuns, do believe. They're just fed up with organized religion.
So another finding from that study was that 82% of nuns rate logic and reason as important in deciding between right and wrong, while 65% of the religious say their religious beliefs are what's important in deciding right and wrong. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. This is actually one of the things that I thought that study did fairly well, is it starts to recognize that nuns do believe in things. Nuns have morals. nuns think about things. They're not just an other category that have no beliefs, that have no morals, that have no values. They do clearly have values, and those values are rooted in like not wanting to hurt people. So that was the number one reason they gave for their moral thinking. But number two was based on logic and reason. And I actually thought that was really nice. They're starting to kind of humanize the nuns and make it so they're not just this other category that people who don't believe anything.
Yeah, well,
Yes, well, I was very pleased that we're worth studying. I mean, this is such a huge trend, and yet where are the studies? Just before we go out for the break, I do have a question for you. I think it's cute, the nun, N-O-N-E-S appellation, but how do you feel about it? I mean, does it tend to make people think we don't believe in anything or we're nothing?
Yes, we're working on this. So the researchers are trying to move past thinking about this group of people as just an other category or an absence category and starting to think about what they actually do believe. The research on this is starting to frame it as worldviews or life stances, existential kind of cultures. There are different terms that we're working on at this point. I don't know that we're going to arrive at a solid conclusion anytime soon, but there are people who are saying, okay, we know what they don't believe and what they don't identify as, but what is the substantive content of being non-religious or being a nun? And there's actually quite a bit of research moving into that area right now.
So according to the study, one thing that the nuns do tend to agree on, whether they're atheists or agnostics or nothing in particular, is that I think 2/3 of them disavow religious teachings and they don't believe in a God. What does that finding show?
One or the other, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this actually does speak to changes that are taking place culturally, not just in the US, of course, but certainly in the US. We've seen declining confidence in a lot of institutions. I mean, if we look at Congress, it's like in the gutter. It's really, really bad. But we've seen declining confidence in organized religion in particular. And I think a lot of those scandals that we just talked about have contributed to that. People just don't trust organized religion as really holding up a moral system or a way of being anymore. And so they don't trust it. They don't trust organized religion. They're running away from organized religion, probably with good reason, right? I mean, it's hard to find an organized religion that has a spotless record at this point. I don't know of any, to be honest.
When we come back, we want to talk with our guest, Professor Ryan T. Cragun, about his book, How to Defeat Religion in 10 Easy Steps.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist.
When I first recorded that commercial back in 2014, being openly atheist in America was still fairly uncommon. Today, the fastest growing religious group in the country is the non-religious, especially among the young. That progress is heartening, but the religious pushback is fierce and the forces of Christian nationalism are well organized. Our progress won't continue unless we work together so that reason and our secular constitution will prevail. That's why I'm asking you to join the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics working to keep state and church separate, just like our founders intended. Please join the Freedom from Religion Foundation today. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
I'm Patrick, and I'm an out-of-the-closet atheist. 9 years ago, I saw Dan Barker debate Christian apologists at the University of Wisconsin. They were discussing the resurrection of Jesus and whether or not it was true. At the time, I was Catholic and was very convinced Dan was wrong and that, in fact, the story was true. That debate prompted me to take a course on early Christian literature, and I, in fact, learned more and questioned my own beliefs. The more I read and the more I learned, the more I came to realize that I was being pretty much intellectually dishonest. Fast forward to 9 years later, I'm now an employee at FFRF and work for the vital mission of separation of state and church. I'm proud to be an out-of-the-closet atheist.
And welcome back to Freethought Matters. We're continuing our conversation with sociologist, former Mormon, and author Ryan T. Cragun about the rise of the seculars, or the nuns, and about his books that he has written. So before we leave the Pew study that we've been talking about, do you have any final thoughts about that study?
Yeah, I thought there was a really interesting finding in there that didn't get any attention in the report itself. And that's the disjuncture between the percentage of people who say that they believe in a God or higher power, and also those who say they kind of are spiritual, and those who believe in heaven. So if you actually look at that, among the nuns, it's like, they're saying 70-ish% believe in a God or higher power, and it's also close to 70% say they believe in a spirit or soul, but only about 35% believe in heaven. And in my mind, what that seems to suggest is a big percentage of those people who say they believe in a God or higher power, or they believe in a spirit, don't really believe in a supernatural one that continues to exist after they die. Otherwise, they would believe in an afterlife, some sort of heaven. So I think we need to do a lot of research on this topic of what do people mean when they say, oh, I believe people have a soul, when they don't believe that soul continues to exist after they die. It's definitely not a supernatural notion, and that doesn't get reflected in that study at all. So I think it's actually kind of undersold in the study that there's something else going on here.
Looks like you're going to be building a new study here pretty soon, huh?
I'm already working on that one, yeah.
So your book, with a fascinating title, How to Defeat Religion in 10 Easy Steps. And you start each chapter of that book with a joke. And I like the one that you said about what's the difference between Disney World and a megachurch. Do you remember that one? Remember the punchline?
I do, but it's been a while. You'd have to read it for me. Do you remember all the details?
I do remember it. You said, what's the difference between Disney World and a megachurch? One is a fantasy land that charges high entrance fees, and the other has rides. So that was worth the price of the book right there.
I appreciate it. I did write all of those jokes myself.
Oh, you did?
I'm
okay.
not a joke writer, but I spend a lot of time trying to come up with those
And
jokes.
you don't live too far from Disney World there, do you, in Florida?
I don't. It's about an hour away. Yeah.
So we don't have time to talk about all 10 of those steps. So let me just briefly read them. Step 1 is to promote and defend secular education. Step 2 is to empower gender, sexual, and racial minorities. Step 3, provide security in this life. Step 4, encourage sexual liberation for everyone. Step 5, stop subsidizing religion and deregulate it. Step 6, encourage regulated capitalism. Step 7, support education, art, and science. Step 8, syncretize holidays and rituals. Step 9, change society to value thinking and scientific inquiry. And step 10, teach humanist ethics in schools. So are you saying if we follow all 10 steps, we will defeat religion?
I mean, that is kind of the point of the book. So yeah, I am trying to argue that. Now, do I think it's easy, that it's going to be a simple kind of solution? Of course not. But based on my read of the literature, those are all steps that we could take that would actually move us in that direction.
Yeah, I agree. But Ryan, these are very good strategies, but I have to disagree with the title of your book, calling them easy.
That was a play on words, of course, right? I'm just trying to make people laugh a little bit
steps,
because you're definitely thinking like how to defeat religion in 10 easy steps. Come on, right? Like this is a mega thing, so it's really hard.
Yeah, so we're losing the war on defending secular education. Our public schools are being robbed to subsidize religiously segregated schools. So, we're trying really hard on a lot of those steps, but not easy.
So step number 2 about empowering gender, sexual, and racial minorities is very timely. And do you think that's why we're seeing such a backlash by some religious groups against women's rights and reproductive rights and LGBTQ rights and like teaching Black history and DEI and such?
Yeah, I think it definitely plays into it. So we know there's quite a bit of research. I mean, it's not mountains of research, but there's quite a bit of research suggesting that sexual and gender minorities tend to be less religious than particularly white men, but heterosexual individuals. So we actually know this. And part of that, of course, is the fault of religions. When religions marginalize these individuals, it's really hard for those people to say, I feel comfortable here, when they're saying like, and you're going to go to hell. It just doesn't make any sense. So we know that those people are marginalized, and as a result, they're less likely to be religious. There are some who are, and that's perfectly fine. And there are some religions that cater to them. Again, that's great, and so be it. But the vast majority of people who fall into those categories really feel marginalized by mainstream religions. And so, we can see that the fact that they've made some strides, that same-sex marriage is legal across the United States now, that's probably gotten, kind of stuck in the craw of religious groups across the U.S., and they're trying to undo that.
Well, we certainly see this with FFRF's membership. We have higher than the general population numbers who are LGBTQ, and we definitely see it in our 5 student essay competitions.
Yeah.
So your book advises that maybe instead of attacking religion head on, we should starve it by depriving it of an environment in which it can thrive. Can you elaborate about that?
One of the things that I kind of wanted to bring up, if I can turn it just a slightly different direction, which is kind of fun, is encouraging regulated capitalism. I don't think everybody's going to fully immediately recognize what it is I'm getting at with that question, which I think, or with that point, which is a lot of fun. I ended up writing a separate article on this. Not a lot of people realize that the NFL actually competes with churches on Sundays. And the more people engage with sports and movie theaters and things like this, the less they're actually participating in religion. And you can actually see this. I ended up getting invited to do a study with a local megachurch, right? So it's a local United Methodist church. They asked me to run some numbers for them, and I asked if I could use the data to just see if attendance is down when there are NFL home games, because we're in Tampa Bay, it's the Buccaneers. And it turns out when there are home games, even though their times are different, people go tailgate and it eats into church, and so their attendance is down. So this is why I'm saying capitalism is actually doing a big part of our job for us, because movie theaters have every incentive to be open on Sunday mornings. Grocery stores are open. There's lots going on. Malls are open on Sunday mornings now. People have lots of opportunities and alternatives to church. So I think that one's actually a lot of fun to kind of wrestle with, even though, I did say regulated capitalism. I don't want laissez-faire capitalism. That's a different issue. But I think we should actually encourage that. That's an interesting idea.
I think that was part of the motivation between stopping mail delivery on Sundays.
Yeah.
Because under a capitalistic system, there's competition. The churches have competition then, right?
Yep.
Well, I think it was with bars. The men would stop and get the mail and then go drinking.
Yeah. And, blue laws still exist all across the states. So as those start to collapse, we're going to start to see even more changes.
Well, we really appreciate your joining us today, Professor Cragun, and all your expertise. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching Freethought Matters.
Because free thought matters.
Hi, I'm Steve Pinker. In my book, Enlightenment Now, I show that the world has become a better place as reason has been overcoming superstition and tribalism. But the values of the Enlightenment are under attack. That's why I'm a proud member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest association of free thinkers working to keep state and church separate. Please join me in supporting the Freedom from Religion Foundation to ensure that our government is driven not by religion, but by reason.